We're glad you were able to join us for our third day. I'm pretty sure you'll find an exciting program, and we have two of our folks who will lead us. Nanju and Clarice Kim will start us off on the first session. Nan?
Okay, yeah, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the third day of our international workshop on energy system-wide analysis of net zero pathways. Today is also the last day of this and training workshop. My name is Nan Zhou, Technical Program Manager of Net Zero World Action Center, and I will facilitate today's session. Yesterday, we have heard an overview of energy system-wide modeling approaches and also from countries. And so today, we will hear from experts who will dive deeper into 4 of the system-wide modeling tools. So let me introduce our first speaker, Sha Yu, Senior Scientist at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Dr. Yu is an expert in energy and environmental issues with a focus on climate change mitigation, climate finance, and integrated assessment modeling. Her work focuses on net zero transition, climate finance scenarios, carbon markets, and industry decarbonization. So she has previously worked on developing and implementing international energy and climate policies. And so with that, and I will introduce Dr. Yu.
Yeah, thank you, Nan, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a great honor to be presented here and discuss the modeling details with all of you. Let me see if I can share the correct screen. Are you all able to see that?
Yes, we can. Very good.
Awesome. Yep. So today, I think my presentation is going to focus on one of the models, Global Change Analysis Model, or GCAM. And I will discuss the model structure as well as the example of its applications, including how it's used in the net zero analysis, the consideration of energy, water, land nexus in this analysis, what are the societal implication and just translation is considered, and how GCAM is used to inform different investment decisions. So to start, GCAM is a global integrated assessment model. It has fully coupled energy, water, land, economy, and climate systems all together in one model. And because all the systems are fully linked and solved simultaneously, the model captures all the interactions and feedbacks across systems. GCAM runs in 5-year time steps, but can also be run on annual basis if needed, and the model runs through 2100. This also worth noting that GCAM is open source community model, is totally free to use. All the source code, underlying data, and documentation are publicly available. At this point, GCAM is roughly 50 years old and has been used in every single IPCC assessment report from the very first assessment report to the latest AR6. And in terms of emissions, the model tracks 24 different types of greenhouse gases, aerosols, and shoreline forces. And in terms of the geographical coverages, GCAM has 32 energy and economic regions, including several of the net zero world regions like Argentina, Indonesia, South Africa, India are all standalone regions in GCAM. It also has over 300 land use regions and over 200 water basins. But these regions are not fixed. GCAM is modular and it's really quite flexible and can be applied at different spatial scales. Like for example, we have like GCAM USA, GCAM China, GCAM Canada, India, like which models at the state and or provincial level. And GCAM can also be used at city level for analysis. And it has been used to develop carbon-free Boston, a plan for the city of Boston towards net zero emissions. And it's currently used in, say, the city of Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur to develop their own like net zero plans. And building on the GCAM analysis, we often do are also plant level analysis, especially for coal and nuclear, and understanding what are kind of coal phase out plan and what are the plan potential implication for certain assets and to assess kind of more detailed level power sector transition at plant level. And GCAM can also provide greater level information, including like water demand runoff and land use cover, land use change, etc. And to enable all this kind of flexible scale analysis, we have developed a range of tools in the past few years to really just enable subnational and regional analysis, making the spatial scale quite flexible in GCAM. So in summary, although GCAM has like 32 global regions, over 300 land use regions, over 200 water basins, but it can also be very flexible and conducting analysis at different spatial scales. In terms of model input and output, GCAM takes like population, GDP, technology cost, resource supply policies as input and generates outputs like emissions, energy consumption, production, technology shares, like commodity trade, energy, food, commodity prices. And just a few things to note here in terms of like GCAM input and output. First of all, like we're using pretty latest data, like we including things like COVID impact on GDP projection and all the latest technology assumptions. And second, all the information in GCAM are regional specific. So we have like regional specific wind resource curve, solar resource curve, CCS storage potential. So a lot of things are kind of within regional specific assumptions. And the third one is really, we're constantly updating the model. Basically, the model yesterday and today are different. Like we're just doing development on a daily basis. And we also consider like innovative and critical technologies. Like for example, we currently have 12 different technologies for hydrogen production, different technologies for hydrogen transmission, distribution, and also end-use application in buildings, industry, and transportation. The model also considers a lot of different negative emission technologies like CCS in refining power industry sector, but also have things like direct air capture. So it has a lot of critical technologies that are important for net zero transition or decarbonization. As mentioned earlier in the very first slide, like GCAM has fully coupled economy, energy, water, land use, and climate systems. They're all fully interactive with each other. They're all solved simultaneously. And I think one of the advantage here is really just providing feedback across systems. Like for example, a region might decide to use bioenergy as part of its mitigation strategy, but it does have implication for the other systems. So in order to grow like more bioenergy crops, it may compete with agricultural land, which would affect potential food prices or potential food import export, but it could also be constrained by water supply and demand. And all of this together would have implication for the global temperature goals and overall carbon cycle. So all the systems are actually fully coupled and provide all this kind of additional feedback and interactions. And this one is just a really high level scheme chart. For each of the system, we actually have a lot more details and hundreds of different technologies supporting the underlying transition. Taking the energy system as one of the examples, the energy system have 4 different components: resource production, energy transformation, final energy, and the end use sector that consumes energy. And again, they're fully linked. Like for the resource production, the model considers both fossil fuels like oil, coal, gas, bioenergy, as well as all this renewable resources and nuclear. Then the resources are fed into the different transformation processes, like they could be electricity generation, hydrogen production, refined liquids production, or bioenergy conversion, or gas processing. And through this transformation process, then the model generates final energy and then goes into 3 different end-use sectors like industry, building, and transport. And for each of the end-use sector, we also have fairly detailed technology representation. Like for example, there are like currently 9 different industry subsectors within GCAM. And for each of sectors, we consider both existing as well as like new technologies. Just looking at like iron steel sector, for example, it has like 8 different competing technologies, which include fairly mature ones like blast furnace, basic oxygen furnaces, electric arc furnaces with scrap metal, but it also considers like new or relatively innovative technologies, like including hydrogen blending in blast furnaces, hydrogen direct reduced iron, as well as like CCS application in the iron and steel sector. And we have like comparable details for pretty much all of the industry sectors here. And the transportation sector is also fairly detailed, like it's broken into passenger and freight. And for each, it has several different competing modes and vehicle types. And it also considers this kind of competing technologies for each of the mode, like including like battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and as well as liquids. And in the liquids, we actually have underlying petroleum production as well as biofuels. So it also considers different types of refined liquids. And given the time limitation, I'm not going to go through each of the sector in detail, but in summary, I think GCAM actually have fairly detailed technology representations throughout all the system, not only on the end-use sector, but also on each of the supply side. And they're all fully linked and providing this kind of system boundary and interaction with each other. So how is GCAM being used in net zero analysis? It's actually been used to conduct net zero analysis in a lot of countries and cities and regions. And I'm only going to give one example here today, just basically how GCAM is used to inform US net zero analysis. So GCAM is the model used to create a US long-term strategy, which is basically US submission to the UNFCCC. And the US long-term strategies models the emission trajectory that are consistent with US NDC and net zero commitment, which is to reduce emissions 50 to 52% below 2005 levels in 2030 and reach net zero emissions or net zero GHG emissions by 2050. And it basically shows that throughout analysis, like US net zero 2050 goal is ambitious, but at the same time it's achievable. However, it requires like really rapid transformation in all sectors, but it can be delivered through multiple different ways. For the US long-term strategy analysis, we actually modeled 12 different pathways or scenarios with different sectoral actions, removal technologies, oil and gas prices, and population GDP trajectories. So in total, there are like 12 different sensitivities or pathways modeled in the US mid-century strategy or long-term strategy. And across all the scenarios, there are some robust messages emerging. It all shows that like all viable routes to net zero involves like 5 key different transformation elements. And the first one is to improve energy efficiency. And this can be achieved through like diverse or today proven technologies, like ranging from more efficient appliances to the integration of efficiency into newer existing buildings or to some like sustainable manufacture processes. The second pillar or component is to decarbonize the power sector. And so US already have a lot of transition going on today and also set a goal of like 100% clean electricity by 2035, which is a crucial foundation for net zero emissions no later than 2050. Also, like switching to all different kind of the low carbon fuels is a third pillar. And today we already know like there are affordable or efficient electrification approach for most part of the economy, like from transportation sector to buildings to in low temperature industry processes. However, there are areas like that electrification presents some technology challenges as of today, like such as aviation, shipping, and industry processes. And in this few areas, we can prioritize clean fuels like carbon-free hydrogen, as well as other like sustainable biofuels. The fourth pillar is to reduce methane as well as other non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions, as US mid-century strategy is net zero GHG by 2050, now net zero CO2. And the last pillar is to really like scale up CO2 removals. And we already know that like emission from energy production can be brought to close to zero, but at the same time, the emissions such as like non-CO2 from agriculture sector will be really difficult to decarbonize completely by around mid-century. So reaching the net zero GHG targets definitely require scaling up CO2 removals that would come from both like enhancing land sinks, but as well as deploying a various range of CO2 removal technologies. So with all this kind of like 5 large strategies together, it gets to net zero emissions by around 2050. And I'm not going to go into the detail. The report is over 100 pages long and it's publicly available online, so you can look for more details, but I probably will just give 2 examples here, what are the implications for power system as well as non-CO2s. So in the US, like we kind of looking into both history and future projection, like renewable capacity projection or additions have been growing really rapidly in the past decade, which is showing on the left chart. So this one is basically, this whole chart is showing the capacity addition in the US. And it's also like, it's really encouraging to see this kind of renewable deployment trend, especially like starting in around 2010, just growing really rapidly in the past decades. And solar wind capacity is about 32 gigawatt in 2020 and expect to be about 28 gigawatt in 2021. But acceleration will be still needed in order to be on the net zero trajectory to 2050. And our representative pathways to 2050 shows that deployment of total net zero technologies, like including solar, wind, and a range of other technologies like fossil fuel with CCS, like all this clean energy technologies, will be roughly about 60 to 70 gigawatt per year. So basically doubling what we currently have in the US. And this one's showing the non-CO2 part of the mitigation. So as mentioned earlier, although we can get rid of most of CO2 emissions from the energy system, and there's still going to be some hard to abate non-CO2 emissions left in the energy system as well as in the agriculture systems. So throughout all the pathways, we can see that all of them have significant reduction in non-CO2 emissions, but they're always going to be remaining non-CO2 emissions. And what supports this non-CO2 emission pathway is actually the model have fairly detailed underlying marginal abatement curves for different gases as well as different sectors. And as you can see that for all the gases, there are significant enough opportunities to do mitigation at fairly low cost, like roughly less than $100 per ton of CO2 equivalent reduction. There are a lot of opportunities there, but there are also kind of more expensive ones as well as the residual emissions that will be really hard to mitigate. So implementing all this kind of technology together have roughly about 35% reduction from all this kind of low mitigation opportunities or technology approaches, and combining with additional activity reduction, which is really about 19% of reduction. I think the non-CO2 emissions in the US reduced roughly about 54% between now and 2050. Oh, just FYI, the macro here is only showing the 2050 marginal abatement curves. If you look at the near term, the low mitigation opportunity could be even more significant. So switching gear a little bit, I'm going to look into a little bit more on how we assess energy, water, land nexus. And so net zero transition really require system-wide transition and like require transformation in all the systems. And working with Inter-America Development Bank, we use GCAM to explore approaches to enhance energy, water, land nexus through the pilot projects in 3 different Latin American countries, including Argentina, Colombia, Uruguay. And the studies really explore energy, water, land nexus or planning at subnational level in response to different like socioeconomic and technology change, climate change, as well as like policy or investment options. Given the time, I think I'm just going to show one quick result here. Like for the analysis in Colombia, it shows like substantial electricity investment needs in the coming decades. But at the same time, this kind of really rapid increase in electricity generation pose additional vulnerability or create additional vulnerabilities to the system. Like it creates potential vulnerability for a hydroelectric dependent system. Like you can see a lot of things are from hydro, but it also create additional or potential vulnerabilities by like expanding agricultural production, like in an evolving international markets. So it also has a potential implication for food production, prices, import, exports. And there are also kind of uncertainties about water availability given the uneven precipitation that can be caused by climate change. And so moving to the next kind of potential application, GCAM has been used to assess actually different types of societal implication and just transition, like this including like components relevant to human health, like food security, nutrition, mortality or mobility due to air pollutant emissions, and human capital, like including education, migration, energy security, like energy access, affordability, as well as sustainability, and of course, like economic implication, like what are implications for labor productivity, capital investment, stranded assets, trade patterns for different commodities. It has also been used to assess national security implication, like civil and interstate conflicts, as well as actually nuclear non-proliferation. It also has the function to analyze ecosystem services, like including water quality and coastal settlement or livelihood. So it has been used in the past to understand a range of different societal implication and how to enable like a just transition. Here are just like several examples. I think you all have the slides, so I'm not going to go through each of them in detail, like all this kind of existing application, but I probably just want to pick one example, give you a flavor on how this is taken. So because the model tracks the interaction across economic, energy, agriculture, land use all in one system, so it does allow us to simultaneously assess domestic and international impacts of mitigation on different sets of like societal goals, as well as like say sustainable development goals. So we actually look into what are countries' NDC level and what are implications of this domestic mitigation to international impacts, but also what are the relationship between domestic mitigation and different societal goals. And in this particular study, we look at metrics like economic development, air quality, energy access, energy security, food security, and ocean health. And the effects are complicated and mixed to some extent. And there are definitely like overall positive consequences for air quality, energy security, ocean health, like showing in the green here. But for a few other goals, for a lot of regions are showing not necessarily all positive impact and probably need additional measures to mitigate the potential impact. So basically showing like there are definitely benefits, but as well as trade-offs in multiple dimensions. Like air quality is one of the things like normally have co-benefits because a lot of measures for mitigating greenhouse gas emissions would also reduce air pollutant emissions. So this is one area have significant like co-benefits with the climate actions. So moving on to my last kind of topic for GCAM application is more on the investment applications. And so how GCAM is used to assess different investment implications. We're currently partnering with NGFS, the network for greening the financial system, which NGFS is a network for central banks to assess transition physical risks of climate change, as well as different economic and financial implications. Under the NGFS, we currently explore 6 different scenarios, including net zero and NDC scenarios. And globally, there are 114 central banks that are part of NGFS members, including several net zero world countries, like for example, the Central Bank of Argentina, Chile, Egypt, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, and South Africa are all members of the NGFS. And then some of the banks are using the scenarios for stress testing and additional financial analysis. And I think this is something really important in NGFS scenarios, like we're doing not only GCAM, we're also partnered with other models like message. I think you're going to hear later about message presentation, also peak remind model. So there are actually 3 different integrated system models used for this analysis to understand the transition risks. And the other, we also use a physical monetary policy NIGEN for doing additional macro scale like financial analysis. And So in total, there are 6 different scenarios looked at, including like low mitigation ones, like NDCs, current policy ones, but also as well as like net zero ones, or 1.5 degree or 2 degree ones. And we're also looking at the implication of delayed transition versus immediate action. So what are the costs for economic system, financial system, stranded assets if we're delaying the mitigation effort? 2 important things I do want to notice here, not only applying to the financial analysis, but broadly for modeling. One is, I think some speaker mentioned yesterday on model intercomparison. Like every model have its own strengths, but having different models, in this case, we have 3 different models, does provide some robust common insights on what are the potential implications for certain problems. So I think having this kind of model intercomparison for a given project or exercise is going to be really powerful and give you really strong, robust messages. And the other thing is on model coupling. Like certain models can only address certain things like GCAM message and reminder used for understanding transition physical risks. But we also coupled with NIGEM, which is basically a physical monetary policy, and gave us additional information on the financial system, like such as inflation or potential liquidity risk or credit risk. So it's also important to notice that there are kind of not a single model approach. We can do either model intercomparison or model coupling to deliver even more robust messages. Just kind of a summary on what information can GCAM generate to to inform investment decisions. And normally there are a range of variables we look at for economic and financial systems. That includes emission prices or carbon prices, commodity markets or trades and of different commodity across the world, and energy investment, carbon removal technologies or potential, different sectoral transition pathways, fossil fuel phase out, as well as potential stranded assets associated with fossil fuel phase out, and clean energy technology penetration investment, agriculture, land use change, and also changes in agricultural products and food for demand and supply. So yeah, towards the end of time, it's my last slide, just kind of in summary on what GCAM is and what we can do. So GCAM has been used in every IPCC assessment report, and is also the model used to create a US long-term strategy. It's used by different partner countries to assess net zero transition and implications. And because the model is an open source tool, it's free to use, we actually have partners across the world doing all kinds of different studies. But relevant to net zero, it has been used to assess net zero pathways, as well as sectoral transition at national, as well as subnational level. I remember like the model is pretty flexible. We can do national analysis, subnational analysis, city level, graded information, as well as plant level analysis. And it has also been used to understand the complicated relationship between energy, water, land in the net zero transition and how the systems are interact or affect each other. And there are a lot of tools within GCAM to analyze societal implication, just transition, as well as we can examine various economic and financial indicators and inform investment decisions in net zero transition. I think with that, I'm going to turn back to Nan.
Thank you, Sha, very much for the excellent presentation. And Gunter, we do have a couple minutes for more questions and answers, right? Okay, yeah, so I can see there are a number of questions in the chat. They have been answered by Sha, your colleague Sahar, and so some are related to the drivers, the endogenous versus exogenous driver, and some are related to previous publications. And yeah, most of these have already been addressed. So I don't know if there are other questions and from the audience, and if not, I have one question.
Yeah, thank you, Zara, for answering all the questions. I'm just following the chat messages.
Okay, and I see additional comments from your colleague Meredith. And I believe the plan is to endogenous GDP within the year. There's also parallel work to break out different income groups, so it'll be modeled and simultaneously with all the other indicators. Yeah, thank you, Meredith, very much.
Yeah.
So my question, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Nan.
My question is mostly related to the applications to some other emerging economies, and what kind of gaps or barrier have you faced? Is it more related to data, or and we have to use different drivers? Yeah, so just some question related to other applications.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you, Nan. I think the one of the biggest challenge we face in emerging economy is definitely data. And I think it's basically how can we characterize the current behavior of the emerging economy correct? I think that's probably definitely one of the major issues on data. And the other, I think is the growth trajectory, because compared to most of developed economy, the growth potential in developing economy is really huge. So how can we characterize that one? I think is also really important. Just one quick note on what Zara and Meredith answered in the chat box. Not only endogenous GDP, I think the plan, part of that plan is also we're going to track employment and government revenue in the same package or development.
Great. Yeah, there's one question we see that has not been addressed yet, and from Asami Mikeda. And so the question is, when assessing different electrification pathways, for example, direct electrification through hydrogen or e-fuels, is it possible to take into account the needs for the alternative network infrastructure investment, for example, transmission network versus hydrogen transportation network, centralized versus decentralized, etc.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's something we're definitely able to capture, because in fact, I think we have ongoing or new hydrogen development work that will be released in June, like in the next model version, which we track 12 different production technology, including both centralized as well as decentralized production. And we also track different transmission network and hydrogen transportation network. So there are different transmission or network infrastructure going into buildings, industry, and transportation sector. So it's fully captured in the model. And because it's also recent development, I believe it captures all the recent technology development, because yeah, in there as well. So the hydrogen component is fairly new and advanced.
Okay, wonderful. I think, and that's with that, we can turn to the next speaker. Thank you very much, Sha.
Yeah, thank you, Nan.
Okay, next I'd like to introduce Evelyn Wright, an energy and climate economist who was formerly a member of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Research and Development, and was more recently engaged by the U.S. Department of Energy to support integration of the TIMES and the VEDA tools within the Energy Information Agency's World Energy Projection System. Dr. Wright works on energy policy for national governments and environmental organizations, and is an energy system decarbonization expert with Argonne National Laboratory. She will introduce TIMES. Evelyn, please remember to unmute yourself and then begin sharing your screen, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Nan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's such an honor to be here with you all. I'm glad for the opportunity to speak about TIMES today. I've really been enjoying hearing all of the other presentations, especially hearing about the country analyses and net zero efforts. It's been really inspiring. So let me get my slides up. Can folks see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So I'm going to talk today about how we would use TIMES to do remote collaboration for net zero analysis and planning. So I'll talk about the TIMES framework generally, but also about how we might use it for an application like this effort. So I want to tell you three basic things about TIMES that I think really make it ideal for the kind of worldwide collaboration that's this net zero world project is endeavoring to take on. First, I'll tell you a little bit about the structure of TIMES and its long history of use worldwide, and the kinds of organizations and places where it's being used for net zero investment analysis. The second thing I'll tell you about is that we've really put a lot of effort into ways to build models to rapidly change scales. So we're building models out of databases now so that we can look at things at a local level, at a country level, at a global level, and really easily move between those scales. And one of the things that means is that we can readily make a detailed country starting point model out of our global model. And I'll tell you about how that works and what those models are configured like, and how we can use them flexibly to start diving deeply into the areas of most interest in a country's energy system. And finally, a great deal of investment has been made in the last few years at putting the model online so that teams that are remote from each other, located anywhere in the world, can collaborate, look at the same model, look at the same results, and really effectively collaborate in that remote way, which is one of the things that's been challenging about modeling in the past. Often it's really involved having to sit next to each other at a computer if you really want to dig in and look at the same thing. And we've now got a cloud-based solution that really empowers working remotely. So firstly, TIMES has a roughly half century now of use and development worldwide. TIMES has been a project of the IEA's Energy Technology Systems Analysis Program, or ETSAP. Some of you may have heard of the Markal model. That was the first kind of version of TIMES that was developed out of ETSAP. And then about 20 years ago, some folks who had been using Markal and pushing it as hard as they could said, let's start over and build something that's more flexible for the kind of decarbonization challenges that we're facing. And that's the result of TIMES. So now TIMES is being used by more than 400 users all over the world. And I'll just let you know, this map here of users is a couple years old. So my apologies if you know you have TIMES users in your country and it's not colored in on the map. But we know that there are folks that are using TIMES all over the world. And ETSAP hosts twice a year meetings and trainings where users come and share what they've been doing with the model, new capabilities that they've been building in the model, and do trainings. There's also an active online user forum where users post questions and learn from each other. So it's a really vibrant and supportive community of users. So TIMES is, Todd talked yesterday about models really being frameworks, and TIMES is a flexible data-driven framework for modeling an energy system. So TIMES represents the energy system as a network running from energy resources on the left side through different ways of processing and transforming and moving those resources into the end uses, and ultimately the demand drivers, GDP, number of households, and energy service demands that drive the system. And so as a framework, it knows that there are certain types of things in the energy system. It knows that there are power plants that turn energy sources into electricity and heat. It knows that there are types of devices like oil refineries and hydrogen plants that change energy from one form into another. It knows that there are things that satisfy end use demands like light bulbs and automobiles. And you populate that framework with data to represent the sources and devices that are important to your system. And so it's extremely flexible and modular and easy to build out new areas in detail, like hydrogen production and distribution systems, or to leave them out or represent them at a very coarse level of detail if they're not important. The model is a least cost optimization model. So you give it this entire network of possibilities and costs, and you give it the demands to meet, and you say, find me the least cost way to put all these pieces together to meet my demands, given then whatever constraints you want to put on the system, carbon budgets, constraints on other pollution, and so on. So it's been applied everywhere from the city level to the global level. It's written in the GAMS modeling language, but you don't have to know how to read GAMS to use it. And it runs in a model management platform called Veda, which, as I mentioned, has recently been put online. So what you tell the model is, what are my existing technologies? How much capacity do I have? How much do they cost to operate? How efficient are they? What are their inputs and outputs? So you build the existing network, and then you tell it also what are the costs and efficiencies of new technologies that are available to invest in? What resources do I have available? How much do they cost? And what kind of renewable resources do I have available? What will, if I build wind and solar, what generation profile will they have? You give it projections of those end use demands that are driving the system, and any policies and constraints that you want to put in. The outputs then are, what's the configuration of that energy system? What investments do I need to make? What's the capacity of all the devices that I have? How do they operate through the year? What energy is consumed? What emissions are produced? And what are the prices on everything? And ultimately, then when I look at a policy case, what do those policies cost and what are the impacts of those policies? So TIMES has been widely used for clean energy investment analysis. It's widely used for evaluation of cost optimal decarbonization and pathways and strategies that are robust to future risks and uncertainties. So one of the real strengths of TIMES is the way you can layer data packets in it in order to create scenarios and sensitivities. And we push it very hard with sensitivity analysis. So for example, we recently did a really deep dive into decarbonization in the Midwest of the US, which is a region that ranges from very cold to very hot, has really mixed kind of demands in building energy use as well as transportation. And we looked at hundreds of electrification scenarios for vehicles and buildings, looking at uncertainties about future vehicle cost, consumer acceptance of vehicles, how well heat pumps could cope with cold days, how fast that technology would improve, what the backup needs would be, and ultimately looking at, in all of those different configurations, what are the impact on the power system? How does it change the load curve? How do different kinds of strategies better help you to integrate renewables or not? So that's the kind of deep dive that you can do into really trying to understand how robust the strategies you're looking at are to the things that are uncertain about how technologies are going to develop, how fuel markets are going to evolve, what solutions are really going to be available at different points in time. So with that structure, you can look at policies, including efficiency standards, portfolio standards, all kinds of tradable clean energy certificate programs. You can look at price-based mechanisms such as subsidies and taxes and feed-in tariffs, as well as carbon pricing mechanisms such as cap and trade and direct carbon taxes. And so it's been used widely by energy analysis organizations. The IEA uses it as part of its energy technology perspectives analysis. The US Energy Information Administration is using it as part of its World Energy Projection System. It's been widely used by development agencies and international finance organizations, and is increasingly being used by large energy companies to develop their energy investment strategies for the changing clean energy world. So as I mentioned, we have been really developing a way to build large-scale models from much more detailed and granular data so that we can easily change the way models are organized on a geographic scale. So the framework is called TM World. It's a 27-region global times model. This is the map of the current regional aggregation, but as I mentioned, that is something we can readily change. And we build it from detailed country level data. So we start with the IEA country energy balances. That gives us our base calibration year. So we know what fuels are being produced, transformed, and consumed in each sector. And that helps us set the initial landscape, along with country level power plant capacity, existing capacity, and age from the Platts power plant database. And then we combine that with detailed renewable potential from NREL, EIA, and YASA for wind and solar potential, hydro and biomass. We also have some international data on industrial production of certain materials. And then we take libraries for future technologies out of some major international and national times models. So we have a set of new technologies that are available for transportation, building, industry, and the power sector. So on the supply side, as I mentioned, we model resources at the country level. Those are broken into several different resource quality classes and cost classes. So you can sort of bid your way up a supply curve from to get better resources. We have new power plants and CHP plants available of a variety of types for investment. And the existing stock, the model will track and make an economic decision whether to retain it or retire it and replace it. Hydrogen production, storage, and trade are available. The biomass supply can be either refined into liquid biofuels or used directly, including for bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. We model oil, gas, and coal production potential with supply curves and country level reserves. And those curves are tuned to the IEA World Energy Outlook scenarios. So we have a number of different scenarios for future energy prices. And we have several scenarios for CCS storage potential and costs based on some of the major global assessments that have been done. On the demand side, we do a detailed breakdown of demands. Transport is modeled in 8 different road modes. Cars and trucks, buses, 2-wheel vehicles, 3-wheel vehicles, along with trains, ships, and aviation, with choices of a variety of different fuels. Building energy use is modeled by end use, so things like heating, cooling, lighting, hot water, refrigeration, and cooking. Each end use has many different competing technologies available to meet it with different fuels and efficiencies. We model energy as services for things like steam, process heat, machine drive within 11 different industries. And then we project those demands for those future energy services by the IPCC shared socioeconomic pathway scenarios. So that gives us a wide range of different population and GDP projections for the 21st century that you can tie back to those scenarios. Now, all of those inputs are flexible. These inputs create a starting point model, which then is a place that we can begin to start looking at how well have we represented your energy system. But you have future population and GDP projections, we can just pop those right in and substitute for the ones that we've drawn from the SSP scenarios. So the work is all done on the Veda Online model processing system, and it's designed to facilitate remote collaboration among teams of users at different levels of involvement with the model. So one of the things we've really discovered in working in different countries with experts is very often you all have a lot on your plate and you know a great deal about your energy system, and having to learn an entire model from the start is a real steep learning curve and a real inhibition to getting down to productive analysis of the energy system. And so the system is designed to facilitate collaboration between the folks who do a deep dive into all of the model inputs and folks who are reviewing the outputs in a way that is very accessible to people who are experts in the energy system, but don't have a need to get into all the details of the model, except where it's relevant to them. So we might have on the left-hand side of this diagram a variety of model users. This could be us supporting the development of the model. It could be teams from multiple different national labs who are engaged in the modeling process, as well as Times users in the country energy modeling team. And they're all sharing the model inputs, which are all stored on GitHub. So GitHub does all of the version control, and it talks directly then to the Veda online system, which I'll show you a few examples of, where all the inputs are held, where all the runs are set up. And then we have a really powerful way of graphing the results. I'll show you some examples. So you can bring in as many stakeholders as you want from involved agencies, from experts in the country energy system, to sit with the model developers online, take a look at the results, draw graphs, post comments, and really interact with each other about what's going on in the system. We can also make, say at the end of the analysis, you want to make the results publicly available. They can also be made available to the public in ways that you specify. So what this looks like in practice, you can get into all of the model data. So this is the view of the model inputs. We're looking at one class of solar that's available in Argentina. You see all of the inputs and outputs, as well as all of the data that's describing the cost, the capacity factors by time of day, the discount rate, the fixed O&M, and so forth. So here's where the model data is all available for everyone to look at, to modify, and to make into runs. And then on the output side, we have a variety of ways to graph and rearrange the data in ways that support the level of detail that you want to see. And I'll show you some examples of how we use that. So how we work with country experts. This is our starting point. You understand your energy system deeply, much better than we do. And you can best learn the structure of the model as it's useful to you. So like I said, rather than sitting down and saying, okay, I'm gonna go through each bit of this and handle each piece of data and learn all the parameters and the terminology, we have found over many years of doing this that the best way to get into the model is to start looking at draft results together, not even draft results, starting point results together, and look at where are they coming from? Why are these things happening? And as we do that, we get into asking questions about how the model is structured, what the input data are, how it's getting to this result. And we find things that we want to change and modify. So Todd spoke yesterday about taking an iterative approach to interpreting results and updating data. That's very much what the system is designed to do. So what we do is we start by, with this starting point model that we've extracted out of TM World. That's a consistent, transparent, and complete starting point. So it's a good place to start. And then we run many, many sensitivities on future demands, future technology costs, policies that you want to look at. And we start trying to understand how the model is behaving and how well it represents the opportunities and challenges that you're looking at. So what you're looking at here are graphs of 6 different scenarios we ran recently. They are run with different SSP scenarios driving them. They have different carbon prices on them. And then the ones on the right have a higher availability of CCS storage potential. And so here we're looking at what are the emissions that are coming out. And you can see in the higher CCS case, availability case, we're getting more of a contribution of negative emissions from CCS. So we can start looking at, under different scenarios, how do we see the model responding to a decarbonization policy? And then we see something that catches our eye. Okay, the transport sector is not moving as much as I thought it would. Let me dig into those details and understand how that sector is behaving. And so we very much do a deep interpretive dive into the model's behavior, because we're looking to understand the relationships within the system, and especially what's robust to different uncertainties, and how we can design strategies that are robust to them. So as we dig into it, the results are really helping us prioritize, where do we need to investigate and update the data a little bit better? You look at this with us and you say, oh, I don't see reflected our efforts to build new electric vehicle charging infrastructure, or our policy to start putting a higher price on gasoline, or our project to build some new transmission infrastructure to connect to that resource that's not available right now. So as those things are identified, we go in and update the data, rerun the scenarios, and do it in an iterative way, and look at the results again. And so together, you learn the model and we learn your energy system by working on it together. And iteratively, the model becomes a better and better representation of your system. And so we're really using the model as a tool to learn about the relationships in the system and how it's going to respond under a wide variety of future uncertainties, so that you can design net zero pathways that are really robust. So my colleague Amit Kanudia likes to summarize this as modeling for insights rather than modeling to get numbers out of it that represent the solution. And that's very much what we're trying to do. So I will stop there. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions now. You can also contact Clarice with any further questions after the presentation.
Thank you, Evelyn, for the excellent presentation. So do we have questions from our audience? I believe we have a few minutes for questions and answers. So I haven't seen anything in the chat room yet. And so if anybody would like to raise your hand, yeah, we welcome. So I can start with a question. So Evelyn, if I'm a user in one of the net zero world countries and would like to use it, how does that work? And I was very intrigued by the online and this VEDA system and you developed. So do you do the model and show us, or do we need to build our own model?
So we start with the country models that we extract from TM. So we build a starting point, and then you as the country modeler gradually get as involved as you want over time. So you can either look at results and data with us and tell us what changes you want to make, or as you get familiar with the model, you can log in and change the data yourself, and we can support you in doing that. So the goal is to not force you to have to learn how to handle the model until you really want to.
Very good. I see Ron has a question.
And thank you, Evelyn, for the excellent presentation, and Sha as well. I guess my question is, could you comment on, and maybe Sha wants to also, the pros and cons of using a least cost optimization model such as times versus a market equilibrium model such as GCAM, so we all understand when you would want to use each of the two models and their relative merits?
Yeah, so I really think of the model as kind of a giant what if calculator, right? As Todd said yesterday, and I really appreciated the way he framed this, the model is not a tool for predicting the future. The model is only something that can calculate the consequences of our assumptions. And so I appreciate the least cost framework because it's very straightforward and transparent. It says, if these are the demands we have, and if these are the options we have available, then what is a cost-effective way for that energy system to be configured? So we know that in many sectors of the economy, people do make cost-driven decisions, like in industry and the power sector, and in others they really don't, right? Households are somewhat insulated from least cost thinking. And so the model is not, we don't think of the model as a predictor. We think of the model as from the perspective of someone planning an energy system transition, what's going to be least cost and how robust is that strategy to the many uncertainties we know we face.
Very good. Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Evelyn. We have another question in the chat from Bruce. We're hearing of multiple modeling tools such as, and I don't know if Sha Yu would like to comment on something before I turn to that question.
I think it's kind of similar to what Evelyn said, but I think also partially answer Bruce's question if I can. There are probably like, as I totally agree with all the speakers, I think there's like different models have different insights, and there's no model particularly right or wrong, but together they would give you powerful insights. But there are a few things like in terms of interpreting results, like there are dynamic recursive versus temporal optimization models, which basically means like when you're making decision, do you know your future perfectly? And that's kind of how you interpret results. For dynamic recursive model, you're only making decision based on currently available information, whereas some of the optimization model, you have the perfect foresight for the future. So I think that's kind of one way of interpreting results. And the other is on optimization versus like in GCAM is logit function. GCAM can also do optimization if needed. But so basically it's like, how do you consider the preferences and behaviors of different consumers and government? And I think that's kind of one difference is like, do you prefer purely least cost, or do you also want to consider additional preferences? And there are probably a few other minor differences, but in general, there's no model particularly right or wrong. I think it's how helpful actually to do multiple model or model intercomparison.
Great. So I think we addressed most of the questions, and given the time, I think we'll just end this session and take a few minutes break, and then we'll have another session and to introduce two other model tools. Gunter, how many minutes do we have for the break?
We'll take 5 minutes, and Gun, can you start the break screen with a 5-minute timer for us, please?
Thank you, Sha, and thank you, Evelyn, again.
Yes, very well. Very